This video is going to teach you how to measure objects, including their angles, as well as using proportions. You're going to want some sort of measuring device, so I'm using the end of a paintbrush because it's easier for you to see in the video, but I really recommend using like a very thin piece of metal that is straight, or you can also use the skewers, like when you're cooking, that work really well. So starting with this first object, what I do is I hold my pencil out in front of me and I get a general idea of the spacing. So I take a measurement from the top down to the bottom, and then I compare that to how wide the measurement, or how wide it is. So it's about half the width that it is tall. So then I go over to my drawing paper, and the first thing that I recommend doing is I recommend practicing drawing that, where you don't actually put a mark on the page, but if you were to draw your object, how big would it be, so that you know that it's going to fit and be a good size within your compositional space. Okay, so once you've done the spacing where you practiced it out, you now are going to go ahead and get the sizing and your angles. So again, you're taking your measuring device, you're measuring the height of your object, and then now you're going over to that paper and you are going to record that measurement. Now, I don't want to draw my cone. Oops, I'll do it darker so you can see. I don't want to draw my cone that height. So I have to decide how many times bigger am I going to recreate my drawing. So I'm going to go ahead and decide that I'm going to make it 3 times bigger, which means I'm going to take this same measurement up and down. So now I have the total height of my cone. As I go back to my cone, I recheck. So that's the height. Now I need to take the width of my object and compare it to the height, which is approximately half. So then I go back to my drawing and I'm going to take this total height and I'm going to visually cut it in half. Again, double check. A little aggressive, so maybe scale it down slightly. Once I have the height and width of my object, I'm now going to get the angles. So for this cone, it's pretty simple. I take my edge, I make sure I have a straight arm, that I'm sitting straight up in the chair, that my tush is not moving in my seat, because even leaning forwards or backwards is drastically going to change what I see. Also, my hand cannot start doing this where I'm like Harry Pottering my object. I've got to keep it straight up and down, and then I'm going to take that edge, closing one eye, and line it up. And then keeping my arm the exact same, I now pivot over to my drawing. Oh, of course, I dropped my pencil. Okay, let's straight edge over to my drawing. Now you hopefully are not moving like I'm moving, because I'm having to do all my looking through the camera. Once I've got that first angle, I now come over back to the other side, line it up, and I switched arms. You will not want to do that. I should point that out. I'm doing that because of the camera. You're going to want to stay with the same arm, but I can't pivot with the camera in the way. So lining it up, pivoting it over, and putting it on my drawing. Once I have the angles and I've had my height, so I know everything is in the correct proportion. Now I can go back and do the shaping. And this is where a lot of beginning artists make a mistake, is they do shaping first and they have nothing in which, no canvas in which to build that shape, the actual shape that I see of my cylinder. So this bottom edge, as I look at it, I can take, again, my straight edge, and I can see if I draw a straight line across there, that angles down. It's a downward curve, and then everything else seems consistent all the way up. So I go back over to my drawing. And this curve has to come down slightly. Now, we could definitely argue that this curve should be inside this space, but for now we're going to decide that for the purpose of this demo, it's okay that I put it down below. You also will notice I made multiple curves and I didn't instantly erase. In fact, I don't even have an eraser available for me. This beginning step as you're a new artist is going to be very messy, and you need to be okay with that, and that the learning is more important. You can always trace this onto a new sheet of paper. Okay, I've now added an additional shape so that you can see how images play with one another. I have to continue to use that same measurement I took. So I'm taking the height of the cone and now I'm comparing it to the cube. And I can see that the cube is about half of the height. So again, I go over to my drawing and I take half the total height, and then I just know that that is going to be about the height of my cube. But then I also have to place my cube within this space. So in order to place my cube within this space, I've got to take this and go on down until I see where the first part of that cube hits. And the back of it hits about a third of the way down from the cone. So I go over here. I can't find a good angle so you can see everything. And the back of that cube is going to hit somewhere along this space. Going back over. I then keep slowly problem solving through this. So now I can see that it hits at about the halfway point. So I go back over. I found the halfway point, which is about here. The top of the cone or cube is going to go somewhere in this space, so I have to move this up. Going back over. Again, all I'm doing is that first step I did with the cone where I'm trying to find spacing, but now I'm having to keep everything in comparison to something else. Once I've figured out about where it starts and stops, I'm just going to double check and make sure that my measurements are happy, which since I've been rotating back and forth, they've changed slightly, as you can see. So this is a good why you keep everything the same. You would then now go into the angles. So as I compare my angles, and I also it can help to see where your angle hits. So this cone hits along that edge. So if I go back over to my drawing, this edge is going to hit here. And then I'm going to check that angle. So I'm going to take this angle and now I'm going to recompare. And yep, it's off ever so slightly, but for the most part, that's pretty good. Then I'm going to take, where does it stop? So it stops just slight of the top of the cone. So I go over here and I believe it stops just about in this area. Go back over, and now I'm going to measure it. So taking my measurement, and again, the only thing I compare that measurement to is the height of the cone. It gets me halfway. So if I come back over, take halfway, and that is just about perfect. There's a little, this nuances might get moved, so I just kind of am going to internalize that for now. Heading back over. Line up. Notice where it intersects. And this is where you can start to see that perspective. A lot of new artists would want to make this angle the same as this angle, and that is not true. Also, a lot of new artists might want to hide the top of the box. And again, this is where you can use this trick to see, like, well, it does hit. I can see the top of it. These two corners line up exactly, so theoretically, as I go back over to this space, this should end about there. When I do my measurements, if it doesn't, it's a sign that something in my angles is wrong and I should go back and correct. Okay, so now compare it to the height. It's about half. And that is pretty close. Close enough that I'm not going to go back and correct anything. Now I just need to get these back angles, and these, the sharper the angle, the harder it is to be willing to trust what you see. And then I'm going to do this one of two ways. I'm going to use the measurement from the top of the box and just kind of compare. It should be, 1, 2, about 5 of those. And then also I'm going to compare this angle here. And then just see as my check, 1, so not anywhere close. So now as I look, I need to figure out what's wrong. Well, this angle that I have here, so I measure on my drawing, and then I take that and I compare it to this, and that's not right. That should sit flatter. Oops, sorry, I was looking at the object instead of through the here. So I need to go back over here and I need to flatten this angle up, which then moves this whole spacing up, which then moves this over, which now allows all of this to make a little bit more sense. And you'll notice that I've left the mistake in there, but as artists gain competency, they start to darken their lines just ever so slightly. And I'm fiddling with that a little bit because I'm wanting it to show up on the video. Most artists would have done all the work that I've done here so faintly that the video doesn't catch it. Okay, I have now added an additional object that is far off in the compositional space. In fact, I'm gonna scooch it closer so it's not that far off in the compositional space. Okay, and adding that has then allowed us to figure out how to still use this measuring device, but factoring in for negative space. So again, I'm gonna measure that object, and then I'm gonna compare that object's height down to my cone, and they are relatively the same size. But then I need to figure out how far away it is, because I can't use that beginning measurement here, because you'll notice that my lines of tape, as they go back into space, if I line this up, it doesn't go straight because that is perspective. My perspective dot for this drawing would be, somewhere back here. And if necessary, artists do use that. I could come over to this space and I could go ahead and draw in those lines going back to a horizon line and to a vanishing point to help me place objects in space. But since we're trying to learn how to measure, I'm gonna take, and I'm attempting to find a measurement that, oops, sorry, I'm not looking through the camera. I'm attempting to find a measurement that matches up with my cone. So it's not that, right about there. The edge of my cube lines up to the edge of the cylinder, which means I can go back to my drawing, take this measurement, apply it like this, and that cone, or no, that tube cylinder is placed somewhere along that edge. Coming back over, pencil, that does not work. I now need to compare the width, just like I did before, which, if I envision that cube being gone, appears to be the exact same width as the cone, but maybe a little slightly smaller, about the size of that front, about a third of the height. Okay, so coming back here, I know it's a third of the height, and then where does it intersect? So it intersects with the top ridge. So right here is about where it goes, and it should be a third of the height, which would get me to about here. And then the placement doesn't seem right. Let me recheck that. Just halfway up. So let's move that up to here. Oops, sorry. And then that height I already know. It's very similar to this. So that tube is going into that space. There's no other angles that I need to draw, which means I now need to go into shaping. So if I zoom in for you, so you can see what I see just the very top bit of that cylinder, and if I need help figuring that out, this is where I can take my device and see that I see the top bit of my cone. So I can come back over here. And within this space, I would see the top bit of that cone, and I also see a very, very slight curve. Within that space. The last thing I'm going to do is I want to make sure to put in that horizon line, and it's intersecting right across the space like this. And at this point I have enough information down that I could go into any detail work, which in this case would happen to be shading, and that will come in a different video. The last little thing I wanted to add, I did go through and darken my lines just a little bit so you could see what I was doing, is to note for accuracy, before you start with any shading, you should step back from your picture and see if something looks off. So close up, particularly in this video, the box that you see does look off. So if you kind of step back and kind of TV screen it, if you just move back just a little bit, like if it was a TV where it's a comfortable viewing distance, if it still looks off, which in my case mine does, then that's something where I'm going to need to go back and spot check what appears to be wrong. And what I feel like is wrong is this small little corner that this whole side needs moved in, and that this angle here appears wrong. So make sure that you are taking that time before you dedicate enormous hours to shading, that you are shading on top of a structure that's not going to look disjointed in the finished product.